Hi, I'm Britton LaRue, and this is Moon to Moon. Moon to Moon is a space to consider, celebrate, and share the ways we come home to ourselves, anchor through change, and uncover our power. 1 month, one phase, one loving step at a time. Hello, Moon to Moon. It's Britton, and I have Unshaming the 5th house for you here. My special guest, my guest astrologer for this episode is none other than Jonathan Coe, who many of you in my community know from their podcast, Healing the Spirit, or from one of their courses, or from being in one of our shared spaces together. When I decided to do the Unshaming the Houses project, I knew that for sure Jonathan was going to be one of the first people that I reached out to. And I proposed to Jonathan to please consider the 5th house because I just had a feeling that the two of us would have a lot to bring out there together. Both Jonathan and I, as you will hear a whole lot about, have Saturn in the 5th house. And a lot of the astrologers who are coming on for this series have Saturn in the house that they wanted to talk about. So there's something for you there to think about for your own chart and your own Saturn placement, dear listener. Let me, because I want to go ahead and get to the conversation. There's so much there. Like we tend to talk a lot when we get together, so it's just full. It's very juicy, and we do all the defining of the 5th house on the other side. But let me just share for listeners who may be new to this podcast, or new to my work, or new to Jonathan's work. That Jonathan and I have a long history of talking astrology together. Actually, in the acknowledgement section of my book, Living Astrology, I thank Jonathan, and I share that Jonathan is quite simply my favorite person to talk astrology with. Jonathan and I have the same birthday. That's like a pretty wild thing. We're both born on March 4th, but 12 years apart and from very different worlds. It's a miracle, it's a miracle, the way some people come into my space. I'm sure you have that feeling about certain people in your life, and I was a very early astrologer. I was pretty regular by the time Jonathan came in at having a lot of clients and having readings, but certainly it was the beginning of my career. It was late summer, I guess, 2019, and Jonathan found me through a Google search and just resonated with my website, I guess, and then studied me for a while on Instagram and realized that I had the same birthday. We're both born at Pisces 13th degree. And we had an instant affinity as souls. And then Jonathan started to take my classes, and Jonathan signed up for everything that I did for quite a long time. Then Jonathan became my teaching assistant. And then over time, that switched into co-facilitators, into a same level teaching partner, colleague. And then I began to receive readings from Jonathan, and we just have been by each other's sides. We're by each other's sides in this mystical walk. and we love to talk. Our composite chart is a Gemini rising chart with our Pisces suns at the top in the 10th house. We've held many classes together, and it's one of the great wonders of my life that I've found myself on the same path as Jonathan Coe, and we get to walk together and have conversations. We both have Saturn in the 5th house, and we both have Moon in the 10th. I think those are like the most... We both have Pisces Mercuries, Pisces Suns, I said. Otherwise, though... Oh, and our Marses are opposing one another. They have Mars in Capricorn, and I have Mars in Cancer. But otherwise, our charts are very different. They're Virgo rising. I'm Aries rising. These are two signs that generally really don't understand each other. But we have found many powerful things in bringing in conjunct rising signs together. Just going to drop that into your space in case you're interested in seeking collaborators with rising signs that are in conjunct to your rising sign. There's something about that I think there's something there. So we both had no plan. None of these Unshaming the Houses have a plan. The idea is just to drop in and just see where we go and see what happens and kind of follow towards a natural completion. And that's what we did. There's so much here. Let me read Jonathan's bio from their website. My name is Jonathan Coe. I'm a queer astrologer, diviner, and alchemist of the subtle realm. My work aims to empower fellow shapeshifters, visionaries, and intuitives in remembering their essence, cultivating skills in being present with the ever-changing nature of reality, and weaving sincere, loving kinships with the world, even when the world has broken our hearts. You can follow my weekly astrological contemplations and conversations with friends on my podcast, Healing the Spirit. And that's a great place to begin if you want to be connected to Jonathan's voice. And also, Jonathan has a class that's coming up called Shapeshifting Academy, which is an astrological immersion into the magic of mutable signs, because Jonathan is Virgo rising, Gemini moon, Pisces sun, lots of mutability in their ways of being. And it's going to be super juicy. So I'm going to have the link in the bio, the show notes rather, for you to go check out Shapeshifting Academy in case you want to go hop in and learn with Jonathan. Let me see. I'll have all the info down below, but it looks like the schedule is beginning October 3rd. So hop on in. Get in before the door's closed. All right. So without further ado, I'm bringing you now into Unshaming the 5th house. Welcome back to Moon, Jonathan Coe, one of my favorite friends to talk astrology with.
Yay! Thank you, Britton. It is such an honor to be back here. I've missed our conversations. And yeah, it just feels like such an honor to be part of this series.
Yay. Well, we were just saying before pressing record, I feel like we're just going to get in a boat and the winds will take us. We just could talk all day.
I know. I love it. I can't wait.
Well, let's see. I guess I'll begin with just bringing you here. One when I first was feeling into this idea of unshaming the houses with different human beings, house by house, one of the first things I knew is I hope Jonathan will say yes to coming to talk about the fifth house. Yeah.
Mm,
Um, yeah, would you let's begin with just describing the fifth house.
yeah.
What is it? What does it mean for you? And um, maybe you can share things about your placements, um, inviting folks in who maybe don't know what the fifth house is.
Sure. Um, to me, the fifth house has a lot to do with children, both literal and creative children. The fifth house also is the house where traditionally Venus rejoices, right? So when we take it back to some of the older significations of the fifth house, we see that it is primarily about children because in the ancient world, that's how you make sure that your life force is preserved and your life force is continued, right? Through your children. And so that was kind of the older signification. And then we see as astrology grows and as we move into different eras, we see that the significations begin to morph more into some of the Venusian significations of pleasure, both physical body pleasures, right, as well as pleasures that have to do with art and entertaining people. Musicians, performers, poets are all kind of in the fifth house arena. And then what I think is interesting is when we get more into the 20th century, we see this divide between pleasure in the context of committed relationships versus pleasure in the context of relationships that may not yet have that level of commitment or actually is extramarital or outside of the conventional bounds of humans. So I think I always like to think of it, and this is, something that I was very inspired by the research of Dimitra George about, right? It's this idea of tracing the arc of the significations of the houses. Something she says in the book is, and this is Ancient Astrology, Volume 2, is how people from different times and different cultures have different concerns, right? And they also have different cosmologies, they have different cultural context. And so over time, the significations of each houses diverge from kind of its oldest significations. And I think for me personally, I see the fifth house as someone who is queer, who doesn't have children at this point, at least, but has a lot of creative children, both like just kind of, floating spirit fetus ideas, as well as things that I've kind of birthed into the world. I see the fifth house for me as very much related to creativity. Yeah,
Mhm.
maybe more so than romance. I see aspects of the romance piece, but I would say for me, the fifth house has a lot to do with creativity and my relationship to creativity, my relationship to my creations, my relationship to like my creative children, and um, yeah, does that answer your question, Britton?
Yeah, thank you for bringing us in.
Yeah.
Yeah, um, I was looking at Demetra George's book last night, in fact, like freshener, little freshener.
Me too. I
And I
always
was,
need to do that.
oh, hail Demetra. And I just was blown away by the opening paragraph for her
Mhm,
chapter on the fifth house,
mhm,
this language. The primary characteristic of life is the ability to reproduce itself and beget its own likeness.
mhm,
Firmicus Maternus emphasized the trine aspect configuration of the first and fifth houses that points to how the native reproduces itself and extends its life by means of the procreative activities. children are the most basic signification of the fifth house, one which has remained constant throughout the entire tradition. I was feeling into this more expansive way of feeling into the fifth house that you've brought in here, which is that it's about like all forms of creativity and what comes out of us and our relationship to what comes out of this. And I was feeling into this idea of the ability to reproduce itself and beget its own likeness, especially in relationship to shame, where like shame can confuse us about that relationship. If like if we're shaming ourselves, then what kind of relationship will we have with that which births from us in our likeness?
Right?
So,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I'm curious if you will share. I mean, I know, of course, some things about your history with creativity and
Mm,
being a creative being and an artist. Just anything that wants to come forward, sharing before you knew about your chart,
yeah.
things about your relationship to creativity, and then maybe how that shifted since astrology has been supporting you in your life.
Hmm. Yeah. So maybe before I get into that, let me just give a little primer to the astro curious about my chart. So I'm a Virgo rising, Pisces sun. So I have my sun in the seventh house, and I have Saturn and Mars both in Capricorn in the fifth house. And depending on which house system you use, if you use Placidus, for example, um, my Venus in Aquarius is also in the fifth house because it's 0 degree Aquarius. So that might be something that's debatable, but it's there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting thinking about my chart, right? My cosmic context as being related to having the fifth house, right? The house where Venus rejoices in the sign of Capricorn, ruled by Saturn, that is domicile for me, right? Because my Saturn is in Capricorn. And so um, there's kind of a weightiness to it. Like if we just kind of look at it, without connecting it to my life, right? Looking at this chart, this is like a chart that has a certain kind of weightiness in that house. And then to add to that, there's an exalted Mars as well in Capricorn, right? Very much, I think they're only 2 degrees apart. So there's a lot of connection here. Mars is very much, the the bulldog that's like, you know, collared by Saturn, right? And like standing right by Saturn is kind of how I see it.
Oh, wow.
Um, so yeah, and then if I think about my own relationship, my story, I would say I began this life as a very creative child. Like I was always very experimental. I wanted to try a lot of different things. The running joke in the house is that whatever Jonathan touches breaks. As a child, I always had to touch everything and then things break. I remember two instances in particular. One was I was at a mall with my mom, and I was just so curious about all these glasses and crystals, and then I broke one, and that was something that really shocked me. She wasn't actually mad at me, but I was just like, whoa, I didn't realize that like if I touched it, it would be broken. And then the other story I remember was I had this new set of crayons, and my dad just got a new car, and I went into his car, and I just started painting. I just started drawing inside of his car, and it was obviously I got into trouble. And yeah, I think that probably gives you a pretty good idea of who I am or who I was as a child. I was always very curious. I wanted to try a lot of different things. I wanted to um, express. There was always something that it felt to me like there was something communicating to me, and I had to just express it. I had to let it come out of me in some shape or form. And usually as a child, it was through doodling and drawing. And um, what is interesting about my story, Britton, is I I was actually exposed to a lot of different forms of creativity throughout my life. Like the first one was visual art. Like I really, really love drawing. Um, and there was kind of this arc, with all of my creative endeavors where I started because I really love it. And then I was just fully in that full energy, right, of just like trying things out. And then somewhere along the way, somebody notices either the energy with which I do the thing, or they notice that what I create is beautiful, or they see something in it, and then they kind of uplift it. And then the next stage is usually me getting all up in my head about needing to make it about some sort of validation or some sort of result, like external result. And um, usually after that point is where my relationship with the modality sours. And then I
Mhm.
quit, and then I do something else. And I think my life has been a series of trying out different modalities. And I think there's absolutely something transferable from like going from one modality to another. But yeah, it's been a lot about like me trying something out, building something, and then quitting, essentially. And it started out with drawing. I really like visual art. I remember being in fourth grade and um, just being completely obliterated by like how my art teacher didn't see like how much work I put in it. And I was like, okay, I'm not doing this anymore. And then I moved on to poetry and I started writing songs. And then I remember maybe the peak of that was I submitted something to a magazine and it didn't get picked. I didn't get a response, and then I got like resentful. And then I decided I'm just gonna quit. And then I started doing music. And music was probably the longest one. Like I started doing music around, I started to get really serious maybe around when I was 10 to 12, and then took it all the way to when I was 23. And then I kind of hit a wall there and I was very uninspired and I felt really unsupported. And then I transformed into something else. I was in classical music for a long time. I went to music school. I was a classical pianist. And then uh, I started writing my own songs. And it was very similar. Like I had that experience too. And then after I released my album, that led me to my spiritual practices. So I think when I look back at my relationship with the fifth house, it's really interesting thinking about Saturn and Mars being there, and both of them very strong, because there's something that the traditional astrologers like to say about Saturn and Mars is that they're malefics, right? And I think of malefics as um the opposite of life promoting. Like when we think about benefics, there's a quality about benefic planets that are promoting or extending life, whereas I think malefics take away life, right? And this is actually a neutral occurrence, because when we think about life being taken away, I like to use the examples of mushrooms, right? If we have cremini mushrooms growing in our field, we like it to grow because we like to eat it, right? But we don't like mold to grow on our bread. So, so the act of stopping life is actually neutral, right? Depending on your perspective. And so what I see with malefics is that they often stop something, right? They kind of they put an end to something. And when I think about Saturn in my fifth house and Mars in my fifth house, I think of Saturn more as like final project vibes. Like, okay, I took it to this level. I submitted my final project. I'm done. I'm graduating, right? And then Mars, I think of as like putting in your 2 weeks notice. You're like, okay, I'm done with this job. Bye bye, right? There is something about, I think, the malefics that has more to do with like, okay, cut, we're done, and so yeah, when I look back at my life, I think my creative force has always been running in a very powerful way and in a way that I can't stop. Like there's always a period where I'm really feverishly working towards something. And then I get to a point where I don't want to do it anymore or it doesn't feel right anymore. And then I think all the skills that I learned and the qualities that I learned then gets transferred into a new endeavor, which is very interesting to just kind of lay it out in front of you. I feel like I just said a lot of words, but I'm curious what's coming up for you. And also, um, I know you have Saturn in the fifth house as well. So I wonder if there's some resonance that you see somewhere in there.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
thanks for that. My goodness. Yeah, I mean, obviously I have the benefit of knowing the whole of your charts very well and it's and I'm feeling into like the way that such strong, powerful Mars and Saturn can like take what your Gemini moon and your Pisces Mercury are like going and exploring and just like they're amplifying through sincere interest and excitement
Mm,
and like spirit uplift and that sense of containment that the that the energy of the Saturn Mars in Capricorn must have felt like at these different chapters of like, oh, I guess we're done, I guess it's over or yeah, and like I'm sh I'm sure they're like unfinished projects is like the unshaming Gemini, like uh the I'm sure that there are parts of you that have feelings about or like have created meanings and stories over those years about like I guess that I'm the kind of person who fill in the blank and
hmm.
then deciding a value judgment on that as a
Yeah.
identity and then as you grow as a compassionate human with yourself um reweaving the story
Mm,
to understand like oh this is how I see it now. I mean
mhm.
but I don't want to put words in your mouth that is what you're up to. But,
Yeah. Yeah,
um
no, but I think that's a very acute and accurate reflection, Britain. And I love that you're bringing in the moon here because it's making me think about what one of our colleagues, Erin Shipley, talked about when she talked about the moon, which is that the moon has a lot to do with dismemberment, actually, also.
mm,
It's like both a remembering and a dismemberment, right? If you think
mm,
about the
mhm,
moon as like this body, the celestial body that continues to grow full and then empties herself back into the new moon cycle, right?
mm,
There's that quality of the moon that has to do with arrangement and rearrangement.
mm.
And I think it was really powerful that intuitively you picked up on my moon quality there because I think that what I'm learning about it is I can really see my fifth house journey as um Jonathan is such a failure when it comes to creativity, right? Or I can see it as here's a story that is centered around um learning something to the extent of learning it fully, getting what I needed out of it, and then taking it to the next chapter, bringing the torch to the next room, right? And lighting up that next room and learning more about what is available in that room for me. And um yeah, that's what's coming up for me in this moment as you're speaking about the moon. And I think unfinished is such an interesting word because I really question where our ideas of completion even come from,
Yeah.
right? Like unfinished from the perspective of
Of
what, you know?
what?
And and it's so interesting because I think, for me personally, thinking about my fifth house ruled by Capricorn, there is always this idea of, there's always this pattern of looking at an authority figure to tell me that, okay, Jonathan, now you've graduated. But I think as I get older and I have a bit more experience with my creativity, the more I see that I get to really set those standards myself.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the pattern disruption feels like that that moment the authority figure comes in to tell you it was good or not. Like getting in front of that,
Yeah.
for yourself, right?
Mhm.
And this reminds me, fifth house Saturn wise, since I have Saturn in my fifth house of Leo, you know, when I was a competitive figure skater, because I do think something we see with fifth house Saturns is this kind of like hobbies are like very serious and rigorous. Like hobbies
Mhm.
falls in fifth house, or like after school activities. Like everyone else may be like playing whatever, like without structure, but the Saturn and fifth house person maybe has like a much more rigid, linear, perhaps structured, focused hobby life, after school activity life. And as a competitive figure skater, I can just remember every jump I landed, after every spin, I would turn to see if my mom was looking, and I would like look for her to nod or do something with her body to indicate her judgment of my work, you know?
Yeah.
Or maybe it was the coach who I had an
Mhm.
hour with, and like everything that I do has comments. Like it
Mm.
has, this is how it could have been better. This is how it could have been better. This is how it was could have been better. And so I quit eventually because I realized I wasn't going to the Olympics. Because yeah, you should quit things when you know you can't go to the Olympics.
Right.
So wild. But
Right.
like it is so healing to skate now, because like I have these abilities that came from the rigor,
Mm.
that are
Mhm.
just body memory, and I can get
Mm.
on a rink and I'm that person who's just so connected to the freedom of what they're doing,
Mm.
and nobody's watching. It's for me. And that those pictures around that have been so helpful in my adulthood, around reconfiguring the patterns so that I'm checking in with myself, like who am I checking in with? You
Yeah.
Who's the Saturn here?
Right. Right. Exactly. I wonder how that experience has been for you, Britton. Like, how do you feel? What does it feel like now, around your Uranus return, or Uranus opposition, rather, to be giving yourself that permission to really look to yourself as the Saturnian authority?
Well, it's just huge. Of the three major consequences of shame, there's lack of self-trust,
Mm.
there's compulsion to fix self,
Mm.
and then feeling like you don't have permission
Mm.
to fill in the blank,
Mhm.
anything.
Mhm.
Usually set some kind of boundary with yourself. Like, I will not engage in that anymore, period.
Yeah. Yeah.
For myself, this is what I need. I'm the one who sets this boundary. I think that for me, like having the audacity to um just be the one to decide if I thought it was good or not. Like what? That has been central to my midlife. Yeah, I did my Saturn opposition and Uranus opposition were both mostly last year.
Mm.
And it
Mhm.
just felt like such a culminating experience when my book came out, which is like a creative baby, like so fifth house.
Mm.
Um, what was I saying? Ability to reproduce itself and beget its own likeness.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. That was Demetra. what was so powerful for me when the book came out was just like truly all that mattered was that I felt good about it. And
Mm,
just, I hope everyone loves it. Like, obviously, it'd be great if it was a big hit,
mm,
changes the field. But at the end of the day, I love it. It makes
yeah.
me cry when I read it.
Mm,
It's so wonderful. The that felt like, oh, I'm Saturning my Saturn. Um,
mm,
I'm
mm,
Saturning
mm,
my creative life in ways that feel really juicy as opposed to the ways that felt very controlling and rigid and contracted and
mm.
like just the strain of worrying if you're doing it wrong or
Yeah.
doing it well. Like, what kind of grade am I going to get today?
Mm, mm, mm,
So,
mm.
yeah, I said a lot there. I'll throw it back to you. What comes up for you next?
Wow, I'm really grateful you shared that. And yeah, it's bringing up something that I'm currently moving through that feels really vulnerable, and I feel like sharing it actually here.
Yes.
I'm like, I think this is, um, yeah, this is a good place to talk about it because when it comes to the fifth house, we often, I have right next to me this book by Rick Rubin, The Creative Act,
Yes.
which is just so, I love this book so much. And I really appreciate a lot of the things that Rick Rubin says. And anybody who listens to my podcast or has talked with me for more than an hour knows that I'm a stan. And also, what I think is so interesting about this specific book, Britton, is it's written by someone who hold space for a lot of creative people, like very creative people, because Rick Rubin is a producer, right? For those who don't know Rick Rubin, he's an American music producer. He produces the likes of Adele and I think Bruno Mars, right? Really big people. And he's been around for a long time. But what's unique about Rick Rubin, who is, by the way, a Pisces sun, in case you didn't know, um, you do know, um, is he actually doesn't really play any instruments. He doesn't really have a lot of technical skills at all. Like he's really kind of someone who just holds the space for people to birth their creative project. His job is really to help people authentically express themselves, especially when they feel stuck. And so I feel like a lot of the words that are said in the creative act, as much as I love reading them and as much as I'm comforted by them, doesn't come from someone who's actually in the field. Like he's not playing soccer. He's not getting his foot like crushed out, And I think what you and I are speaking to here, and especially when it comes to unshaming the fifth house, let me put it this way. You can't unshame the fifth house if you don't do fifth house things. You cannot unshame your
Oh my
creativity,
God, there it
right?
is.
You cannot unshame your relationship to creativity if you never make anything.
Yeah.
You can't unshame your relationship to children if you don't have children.
Mhm.
It's easy for me, who's been a child, to say, okay, if you are a parent now, do XYZ to be a good parent, or unshame yourself because you're doing your best. It's easy for me to say because I don't have children, right?
Mhm.
So as much as I love and revere Rick Rubin, this guy is not making music. And he doesn't feel, I think, some of the pain, of like putting yourself out there and like um uh, the criticism, right? Or the feedback. I think the words that are coming up for me right now, Britton, are two words from your share. One was the idea of feedback, and the other one was the idea of disappointment.
Mhm.
Because when we put our life force out there, especially in the form of our creative expression, chances are we're putting it out because there's something really true and authentic and deeply vulnerable that we're putting into the thing. And the more of us is in the thing, the more, if the reception isn't aligned with what we were expecting for, it's going to hurt. That's just the reality. right? I recently launched a course, meaning I started talking about a course called Shapeshifting
Yes.
Academy, which is it is so fucking vulnerable for me to launch this course because it's a deep dive on mutability. And as a Virgo rising, Pisces Sun, Gemini Moon, my whole life has been about mutability. Like I literally, even when we're talking about my fifth house, which is ruled by Capricorn, right, a cardinal sign, it still felt very mutable because I'm walking the Virgo path in life, and so
Hmm.
um it felt so personal and so like it's really coming out of me. And this is the first time I'm sharing something where within 24 hours, sign up was crickets. And it was so like it made me see, Britain, the reality of what happens when you put yourself out there.
Mm.
Because something that I've really loved about being in spiritual spaces is learning how to be a channel. Like a lot of my creations just kind of come through me, and it's almost like I'm reading the collective, right? I'm kind of this like psychic reading the collective body, reading the collective current, and then responding to that collective current. But this offering has been really different. This offering has been me looking at the collective current, yes, but also just sharing something that's so personal to me.
Mm.
And when you share something personal and you don't get the response that you want, that hurts a lot more
Yes.
than when you're just like, here you go, this is an offering, take it or leave it. I don't really care, right? If nobody signs up, I'll be like, okay, fine. Like, cool,
Yeah.
no problem, right? So it's interesting because even I was so I didn't start out doing this, but with this offering, what felt right was to really through the course page, through the promotion, to talk like myself, to be a little messy. Like I wasn't I was creating draft after draft, but the point of creating those drafts was to talk like myself, to sound like
Yeah.
myself. And it was really scary because I was like, whoa, this is what it felt like. And I think part of unshaming the fifth house has to do with recognizing that as long as you're alive, you're going to have impact. And as long as you have impact, there will be feedback coming from the outside world about who you are, about your creativity, about your, both creative and literal children. And I think what I was just talking to my partner about this, something that we started to see in terms of our friends who start to become parents is there's a certain level of vulnerability in introducing their kids to us, especially if we were friends with them before they got married, before they have kids, and then they had to kind of go into this underworld experience of having kids, right, and being really busy, and maybe you know drifting apart from those of us who don't have children. And then when we reconnect, it's almost like there is a certain level of vulnerability introducing their children because children almost become this mirror, right, to some of the values and some of the things that their parents do, but their parents can't fully control it. Like we as adults, when we think about the first house, right? The identity, the body piece, we do a lot of things. We talk a certain way, we go to the gym so we look a certain way, we put on makeup, we put on clothes so that we look a certain way. But when it comes to children, both creative or literal, it's almost like you can't control them because they have their own life force. Even though they came
Mhm.
from you, they have their own desires, they have their own trajectory, they have their own ways of being, they have their own quirkiness. This is something that over the years, I have a lot of friction with my parents about this because I am different beings than them. But also, there are ways in which I remind them of themselves. So, this whole idea of like children always doing things that their parents don't approve of is so real, right? Because they
Mhm.
take whatever the parents gave them and then they struck their own path. And I think with our creative children is the same way too. And this process of, within the first 24 hours, not really getting any signups for me for this offering has taught me, oh, so many things, Britton, but it's taught me to see my relationship with being a creative, and how there's this belief for me that if I were granted, or if I had access to this big vision, then the way that the universe is supposed to support me is to then give me XYZ, right? When I think the reality, when we start to really look at the pain that we feel within our bodies and in our aura, like the pain that comes up from our creative projects or our children not behaving or not getting the results that we were expecting to, is showing us how much we don't control reality.
Yeah.
And that the beauty of doing creative projects or having children is having that relationship. Like, you get to have a relationship with inspiration, with life force that's coming through you. How magnificent, and also you can't control it.
And you can't.
You can't.
Oh, so much there, Jonathan. Thank you for sharing and taking us here.
Yeah.
A couple things I'm thinking about is, one, I talked with Sabrina Monarch in the second house episode about like the abundance, the abundant feeling when you, but also the intense vulnerability of putting the real thing, like the gift, like the thing that's moving through you out in the world, and it's tied to your livelihood in some way, like you're going to be paid for it.
Mhm.
And this really makes me think about how we all have a square to our between the second house and the fifth house. So there's always going to be some kind of story of difficulty or like tension there. But that's also where, like, it's through those squares that some of the most interesting things come out of us, and like relating to how what we're putting out relates to the feedback of, especially when it's tied to resources in some way. I think it's like such a spiritual like process. Seriously.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And like how I take feedback always like shows me where I am with things. Because sometimes I'll open myself up to feedback kind of without really thinking about what could happen to me. I talked about this in the hypervigilance episode with Natasha Levenger about like that sometimes there could be a hypervigilant part of me that might go into reading the results of a feedback form, like scanning for problems or like scanning for critique, or a part that's like, it better be good, and that I've learned, like, don't ask for feedback when you're in that hyper vulnerable place where like it's gonna like cause sleep deprivation, and it's too destabilized. Like, are you in a stable enough place for this,
Yeah.
and one of the things that helps me is to talk to my inner selves that are terrified, because what I'm afraid of ultimately is that I'm going to have to listen to that critique if I really take it back. If I really take it back, I have a young one inside of me that's like, I don't care what you think. Don't tell me what to do. I want to do it my way.
Yes.
I'm not here to perform for you.
Yes.
This is what I want to do. So there's some part of me before I look at feedback that's like, I really need to connect with that part to let them know, like, we're going to come. What do you feel good?
Mhm.
Do you feel good? Did
Mhm.
you love it?
Mhm.
what was it a beautiful experience, whatever the form is related to for you?
Yeah.
Is there anything that you wish you'd done differently? What are things you already know were maybe a little sloppy or that could have been more thoughtful?
Yeah.
Are you willing to learn next time?
Mm.
Are you open to receiving like really great ideas that will help transform your offering into even more beautiful thing next time? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, maybe it won't be beautiful, maybe it'll be something else. But the point is, um, I feel like part of Saturning in the fifth house has been like really being the one who's like aware of all these parts of me that struggle with external feedback because of how it made the creative process so difficult to feel like I could ever feel good about it when I was
Mhm.
younger.
Yeah. Yeah. As you're speaking, Britton, I'm thinking about how creativity or having children or even romance is always a process, right? Like falling in love in and of itself is a process. And the question here, I think, as we consider the idea of unshaming the fifth house, is are you willing to go on the journey? I'm reminded in this moment of how, again, the fifth house is um, the house where Venus rejoices, and you were the one who introduced me to the myth of Inanna, right? Inanna going into the underworld. This is an older, I believe, Sumerian or Mesopotamian version of Venus, right? And going into the underworld to meet her sister, right? And in the process of her going into the underworld, she has to take off all these adornments, right? That she's accrued in the above world. And so I think when it comes to the fifth house, it's so interesting because ancient astrologers call this house the good fortune house, the house of good fortune, right? And it makes sense because if you think about it in the context of the ancient world, to have children is good fortune, right? Because it ensures that someone will look after you after when you're older, right? That there is a likelihood of your family name being carried over, right? There's this idea, I think, of legacy as well with the fifth house, right? If we think about it connected to children. And also at the same time, children don't just become adults like in 2 days, right? They don't just hatch out of an egg and then turn into an adult, who's like fully fledged and like has all this maturity, right? Like nobody is Athena. Nobody just kind of came out of their parents' heads, right? And turned into this wise adult, this epitome of wisdom, right? We all have to go through the process of growing up. And sometimes I think with creative projects, because it does have its own life force, part of the creative work to me is also recognizing that it will have an expiration date. It does not live on and on and on forever, right? Um, Even though that's the hope. Like we want the legacy.
Especially for the Saturns in us.
Exactly. For both of us having Saturn in the fifth house. But I think recognizing that, yep, it will have an ending, right? And that's okay. And um, this is making me think too, Britton, about something that was that I've been learning a lot recently, which is the idea that because of the context we live in, the social cultural context we live in, right? And I'm specifically referring to both of us are in the Western, so-called Western hemisphere, in the Western culture, right? We are deeply impacted, to the fabric of our reality by things like capitalism, things like coloniality, right? Colonialism. And so we equate money to life. But in and of itself, money or acclaim or fame is not inherently related to life. We just created a society that makes it mean that our aliveness depends on these things, right? And I think when we think about the fifth house and the idea of being inspired by something, right? Creating something, that life force that moves through us, that wants to be created by us, is not inherently related to money. It has
Mhm.
its own intelligence, right? And I think, to go back to what you were saying earlier, which I thought was so profound about feedback, we can, if we remember this in our heart and in our spirit, right? Then I think it can give us the strength to incorporate some of the feedback. Okay, if I put out this offering, nobody's purchasing in the first 24 hours. What happened here? What happened with this launch, right? Like, is there anything wrong? Or maybe it's just taking a certain amount of time that it wants to take, right? It has its own intelligence, it has its own timeline, it has its own growth process. When I look back, some of the most powerful projects that I've undertaken creatively, some of the projects I was most proud of didn't take off right away. They took time, and sometimes I get impatient and I want to release it maybe before it's ready, or that it has to go through certain iterations for it to get to the place that I want it to get to. And that's fine, right? Like, what if we allow our creation? What if we allow our children? What if we allow our love stories to unfold in the ways that they want to unfold? What
Yeah.
opens up then, right? How might we be um, able to maybe relax our nervous systems a little bit more and be in a state of regulation, right? Which doesn't mean that we're happy about it, right? We can be disappointed, but disappointment doesn't kill you or doesn't have to kill you. You
Uh-huh.
have a choice of not letting disappointment kill you. Like, you can be crushed, you can be disappointed, and maybe that's a sign for you to take a break, eat some ice cream, walk in the park, right? Walk under the sun.
Yeah, I'm thinking about here how the procreative activity, the slash creative activities of the fifth house are creating beings in your likeness that are not you.
Mhm.
Um, and how when I relate to my creative offerings as from me, but not me, like they're their own beings, then if I were to like immediately ditch them because I didn't get a lot of signups, or like if I was to immediately ditch them because somebody was like, I didn't like it,
Yeah.
like, then it's like I'm basically saying you failed me, like you
Mhm.
suck, you're nobody likes you, nobody wants you,
Mhm.
and I think when I don't, I wouldn't want that for my daughters. So why would I like if I found out someone treated my daughter like that, there would be people would be hearing about this. I'd be very upset.
Right.
But yet I'm available to critique like that for my own creative offerings, like
Mm.
I think that something that is helpful in the unshaming process is just continuously separating ourselves from our own shame, from the shame that we might be projecting
Yeah.
onto like what comes out of us,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
we we will identify with the critique to the degree that we identify with the shame that we've projected onto
Mhm.
the thing.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I This is interesting, Britton, because I remember the very first reading I had with you. You said something about Capricorn that really made me tear up. I've said this before, but you said something about how Capricorn, goes to the top or climbs the mountain, right? Tries to reach the peak of the mountain, and then sometimes recognizes that that's not their mountain. That's not the mountain they want to be at. And so they climb down the mountain and then they find another mountain that they want to be at, right? Like, there is that quality. And I just remembered being so encouraged by that, and it felt so resonant, and over the years of watching you create, like there's something so artistic to me about your process that you allow yourself to really be um it's almost like this very empress-like quality, right? To relating with one's creation. Like it is coming from out of you. It is your creative baby. And um there is a certain level of protection that I think one needs to create for oneself. Or I think there's also opportunities for just alchemizing. Because sometimes some of those um defense mechanisms that we put around ourselves, they've kind of made the creation process not so fun. And I think when I think back to the fifth house being the house where Venus rejoices, there's something here about remembering that the point of doing fifth house stuff is to have fun, you know?
Right. Saturn in fifth house, like, wait, could you say that again? Like,
Yes. Yes, it's like the point is like to have fun, right? Like if you want to create something, remember to have fun. If you want
totally.
to have children, like you signed up for this path because you want to reap the juicy peach of like having this relationship with this child,
Mhm,
who
mhm.
who is like you but not you, right? If you want to be in a romantic relationship, you want to have fun. And that doesn't mean that things always have to be easeful, right? I think when we talk about Venusian things, Venus always brings us back to the body, right? Venus is so corporeal. Like you can't experience Venusian things without a body, quite literally,
Right.
right? Like we enjoy music because we have the ears that we have, right? We have the ability to listen that we have, right? We are able to enjoy sex because we have reproductive organs. Otherwise, you can't enjoy it, friends. Like you have the Venusian things are always like filtered through the body, and so the flip side of that is that it's also going to bring up pain, right? And it's almost this cliche of like pain and pleasure being really intertwined with one another. And I think we can take pleasure in some of that pain sometimes, and that's where we kind of get to um some of the wisdom of kink, right? That when we create something and then we get rejected, and it shows up as sensation in our body, right? It shows up as longing. It shows up as like, I just like want to tear myself apart. Like there's also pleasure in that sensation.
Yes.
Like there's something so dramatic about it. I was thinking about this the other day, like to just mope around the house and be like, nobody wants my offering. It's actually so pleasurable. Like being a little dramatic about it. And then, once we recognize and acknowledge and embrace that part of us that maybe is a little bit embarrassing and a little bit cringe and extra dramatic, then we can go back to reconfiguring, how we want to relate to our creativity, right? Or, I think about the decades, maybe not decades, but like years long conflicts that I've had with my parents, and
Mhm.
how when we look back, there is kind of a humor to it, you know, like it's kind of funny, it's painful, yes, especially when it was happening. But once some of that pain is accepted and transmuted and allowed to be, right? And the gushing wound has turned into like this, when we start to close some of the wounds and we let the wounds take their time to close, you end up with a battle scar. It's kind of cool,
Mm.
you know?
It is kind of cool. It is also a kinky thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, gosh, it's so true. And it's funny. I only in the last, certainly in the last year, but like in the last couple weeks have I fully landed in like, I am an artist. Like, oh, these classes I have are my art.
Yeah.
That's what I'm doing. It's
Yep.
like I'm masquerading as a teacher. And the reframe of that feels so powerful, but like it's kind of like when I announced I was psychic a couple of years ago, and like my longtime clients were like, "We always knew you were giving psychic readings. This is not a surprise." Like
Nope.
it takes some of us, a while to see ourselves. The 12th house sons often have this. And just like, oh, that's the paradigm
Mm.
that I'm talking about. Like
Hmm.
it really shifted something for me.
Yeah.
But it was like I got to the punchline way after the process, you know. I
Hmm.
didn't start with that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like, what does being a businesswoman look like when you're an artist? Like I didn't think that. I just became an artist through showing up creatively to my business teaching world.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
What does that word mean to you, Britton? What do you feel it means to be an artist?
I feel like it's now I feel weepy.
Mm.
Uh what I heard was like something along the lines of it's the most important relationship there is.
Mm.
Which it feels like um being in utter devotion to listening to and playing with something like my spirit self or like a soul self, you know, that
Yeah.
is um taking me places I can't see fully, but I am like just in a daily act of receiving instructions
Mhm.
and letting it roll through me. It's the best. It's the best. It's so alive.
Yeah.
I don't know
Yeah.
if everyone feels the same way about it,
Mm.
but what do you think?
I have never met a single person who is not an artist. I think it has more to do with how comfortable they are with that term,
Yeah,
right? Um and the reason why I say that is because to me, art has a lot to do with taking it all in. To me, art isn't really about filtering it out. Art is about having the self-trust to be like, give it all to me, right? Like I want it all. And then I'll take it, and whatever comes out of me after that is part of that process, right? Of taking it all in. To me, art is about the process of digesting the external into the internal, which we know that division of internal external is totally an illusion, right? But then
Mhm.
is giving it back to the outside. To me, art is like that
Mhm.
process of transmuting. Think about someone like um Taylor Swift, like her or not, right? Like this is someone who's able to take really painful experiences. Like imagine, being someone who has been working so hard and then on stage, Kanye West, takes your medal, your award, and like start babbling. That was so painful, right? And then like turn it into like a whole album about that, right? Like that to
Mhm.
me is art. And it doesn't always have to be things that are painful. I think things that are beautiful too can be turned into art. Art is a response, right? Art is a response. It's us saying, yes, I am part of this ecosystem, but I also have a response that's unique to me.
Totally.
And I'm going to let you see it, right? And in that process, you get to see me, which is kind of scary. because then you are showing yourself to the world, and I think yeah, yeah, I don't really know where I was going with that, but
Well,
that
what's
feels
interesting is like it's it's unshaming. The unshaming process is so important here, I think, because um, of the just deeply harmful way we're taught what art is and what creativity is. Just a fraction of people leave secondary school feeling connected to the word artist or the word creativity.
yeah.
Like, what is the number? It's got to be a low percentage,
Hmm.
very low.
Hmm.
And I haven't considered, I'm 46 years old, and it's just in the last year that I
Hmm.
like really taking this on. Well, creativity I did before a little bit, but
Hmm.
artist now.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like what are what words can we use to help initiate trust in the process of what you're describing
Mm.
without attaching the shame of I'm not an artist though, or like I'm not a creative person to what we think is
Mhm.
even happening, so that like we just create our way to realizing we're creators or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah. It's making me think about a word that you often use, Britain, which is preposterous. Because I
Which is
think
really a
there's
Matt Bull word, my boyfriend. Like,
Hi, Matt. Yeah, because I think there's something so audacious, right, about claiming that you are an artist,
yeah.
because the artist, right, it's almost like I think about why art and creativity feels so scary. I think it's very similar to why magic feels scary,
Mm-hmm.
because I think art and creativity is in the very fabric of life and reality itself, just like magic is in the fabric of life and reality itself, right? And so I think to claim that is to claim life, to claim art, and to claim your innate creativity is to claim life. And I've been thinking a lot about the idea of peace, Britain, and the idea of pressure. And this is connected to something that you and I are both passionate about, which is human design. And the other day, I was hearing one of my teachers, Amy Lee, talk about the open or undefined root. And she talks about how in the undefined root, there can be this feeling of needing to get rid of the pressure in
Mm.
life, right? Like wanting to release the pressure of being alive. But life itself is pressure. This is what Ra, the founder of human design, says, right? Life itself is pressure. And so, in a way, I think art is the same thing. I think that when we want to have peace, and our idea of peace is where there's no more strife, where there's no more pain, where there's no more friction, you only get that when you're completely dead, my friend.
Yeah.
you know and even then, like, I don't know, I've never been dead, or I don't remember, at least, what is that experience of being decomposed by like the worms and the mycelial network. Like, I don't know what that experience is like, right? So to assume that there is such a thing as this elusive peace, which I think the reason why I'm bringing this in is because a lot of people, I've heard this so many times, Britain, because there's a weird pattern in my client base where I get the privilege of seeing a lot of people who are sun in the fourth house and sun in the fifth house. I don't know what it is about me, but I get a lot of clients who are sun in fourth and sun in fifth house. And so what I keep hearing is if I if I let myself be an artist, I'm going to disrupt the peace, right, of my home, of my children, of my relationships, because suddenly, you know, mom, who's always available to text you back and to make your lunches, is busy with her tapestry that she now wants to create, right? Or busy with her Etsy shop, or busy with her online work, and that's something that I hear about a lot. And to that, I always respond, where is this idea of harmony even coming from? When we talk about Venus, we have to talk about harmony. And one of my favorite things to talk about with regards to harmony is through the lens of music, right? Harmony doesn't come from sameness. Imagine if you listen to a song in the radio and it's just one line, unless it's like a Gregorian chant, like so boring, right? Harmony is created because there's so many different instruments playing all kinds of different notes. That's how harmony is created, right? That's how beauty is created. Beauty is created through contrast. And I think when we think about unshaming our fifth house, another word that maybe we haven't brought in Britain, which is more of a modern signification of the fifth house, is authentic expression, right? Authenticity is something that
Mm-hmm.
we talk about in modern astrology a lot, because in modern astrology, the fifth house is associated with the sun, right? So then we think about the fifth house being about this um, part of you that wants to shine, part of you that wants to be seen, part of you that wants to be at the center. Um, And I think so many of us are afraid of being seen as the center of attention because, right, it's like where we put ourselves in a position where we can be criticized by other people, and
Mm-hmm.
I think about how our authentic expressions that want to move through us, that is a sincere moment by moment translation of our life force, is not something we can control or predict. There's this idea, right, that in order to be a respectable human being, you have to speak a certain way. You have to appear a certain way. Don't use too many exclamation marks when you're texting. Don't use too many emojis if you want to be seen as a creative and, if you want to be seen as a serious person. This is something
Mm-hmm.
I'm really reflecting on a lot because I'm someone who's very expressive, actually. And I've received a lot of reflection that people don't like it when I'm expressive. People want, the calm, collected, all transcended, enlightened healer Jonathan.
Dumbledore.
Dumbledore, yeah. And it's like
Although
I
Dumbledore had some hot takes too.
Dumbledore has hot takes. Like I've actually recently started watching the Fantastic Beasts, and
Hmm.
there were some really interesting plots there. Dumbledore was lovers with Grindelwald, and they were kind of in the spine, right? And I really like the Fantastic Beasts because it gives Dumbledore, I think, uh, a different dimensionality and humanity. Yeah.
More signs come through, like
Yeah.
a fullness of him.
Mhm.
Yeah, what I'm thinking about right now is how because of probably, capitalism,
Mhm.
coloniality,
Yeah.
we mark our creative offspring as successes or failures depending on like what happens to them or like in
Mhm.
terms of our reputation or our career. And I was thinking about how the 10th house and the fifth house really don't see each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that always actually helps me, this visual of my fifth house is not actually even looking at my 10th house. Like, maybe the things that come out of my fifth house will work their way into my career reputation, what I'm known for, but that's not actually like, it's not a pipeline.
Mm.
Now they could make their way to like a school, like ninth house
Mm.
or third house in a way that would make more sense, right? But
Mhm.
that is how it could roll. But I think in general, when we think about creativity, we think it has to be productive in the sense of like it's serving a quote unquote purpose, and that quote unquote purpose is serving capitalism in some way.
Mhm.
So there's a chain of events there that can make it feel like, well, what's the point? Like,
Yeah.
why would I even find out about this part of myself?
Mhm.
Or if we do find out about this part of ourselves, we're shaming it as we do it because we feel like it's supposed to do something or it's supposed to get validated in order to justify the time that we're using when we're doing it. But to me,
Yeah.
fifth house time is a much more of a flow state time
Mhm.
that's different than clock time.
Yeah.
Um, though those with Saturn in the fifth house, like us, for me, that has always made it like the what if I lose track of time? Like what
Mm.
if it's I get too into playing that I forget that I have chores, like
Mhm. Yeah,
I think
relatable.
that if you think about like different ways of relating to time, to me the fifth house is not a sands through the hourglass way of
Mm.
relating to time,
Yeah.
but it also will depend on the sign and planets that you have there.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. As you're speaking, I'm reminded of something I heard, I don't know, from different people, I think, in the past month, which was the reality that no one will care about your creative work the way you do. No one will care about it as much, or no one will care about it in the ways that you do, right? So this and looking back, Britton, to go back to my story about quitting all these creative endeavors, I, I'm now, how old am I? 34. I am now able to really see what happened there because I think, yes, I am a mutable rising. There is a time when there's this invisible clock that goes like, okay, time to pivot, right? Like it's more exciting for you somewhere else, it's like Alice, or like Narnia, right? Like, okay, change of scenery. Um, and also at the same time, those moments of quitting, especially if or because I am not getting the feedback I want, always comes from um a misconception of the self for me, which is I start to see myself through the lens of another or my own imagination of what another person thinks of me. And I don't know why, but from the beginning of starting to do energy work, I keep getting this visual, Britton, of turning the eye inward. And I always use this in my own meditation where I visualize an eye going outwards and then I turn it inside. I turn it on the inside of my aura and then I let this giant eye see me. And I've been understanding that as how, for me, my spiritual practice has a lot to do with returning, remembering into my own idea and my own perception of myself,
Mm.
rather than moving through the world looking outwards and being like, am I doing okay? How am I doing here? How's everyone doing? Is everyone okay with who I am right now? Really giving myself the gift of turning that eye inward and like, how am I doing? Right? This
Whoa, what a question.
what a question. This is a variation of something you mentioned earlier, about authority. Because to me, it's I in my cosmology see it slightly differently. I see it more as like self-perception because
Mhm.
it's so easy, I think, when we, especially thinking about the fifth house as the house where Venus rejoices, right? Venus wants to connect. So when we create, whether that be creative children or actual children, there is a desire to connect there. And so it does hurt. right? It does pain us to see it not getting the feedback
Yes.
that we were hoping for. And also, we can hold the both and, right? We can be utterly impressed by how authentic we've been and to be devastatingly disappointed by how people respond to it, right? This doesn't have to be an experience that's an either or. It can be both and, and so I find it really helpful to remember, that no one will care about my creative work the way I care about it. It's just not
Mm.
going to happen, and there's grief around that, there's pain around that, and isn't that why I signed up to be human? Because I want to experience grief on some level. I want to
Yeah.
experience pain on some level, and recently this is making me think about something that our mutual friend Mallory Dowd once said to me that really blew my mind. In a recorded reading, she said to me, Jonathan, you struck me as someone who is interested in cultivating mastery of these tools, right, and these practices so that you can participate in life more fully rather than opting out of it. And I don't think there's anything wrong. And to be clear, it is some people's path to opt out of life.
Mhm.
That's why we have,
Mhm.
the mystics who move to the mountain, who never want to see people again, and then you have to travel 4 days just to see them, right? But I think for a lot of us who are artists, that's not gonna cut it for us. We want that feedback, even if the feedback is crickets, even if the feedback
Yeah.
is being canceled. There is something about the feedback that will remind us of that connection, right? That Venus is wanting, because to be alive is to be connected.
So so good. I'm seeing like this journey from the hermit to, well, art or temperance
Mhm.
here around um the that art is an alchemical process of connecting. It's not just one thing, not just you and yourself. There's like the mystic to the alchemist
Yeah,
as archetypes.
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, I was thank you. There's so much there, my goodness. But what I was thinking about is how my parenting has shifted so much, fifth house children, as I realized that just like how much of my parenting was about trying to secure a story from the for them that they had a good mother.
Mm. Hmm. Wow.
And like realizing you have no control over this. Like you have none. And who's to say that the bad mother stories that they may have, among many stories, aren't like the most important ones that
Mm.
they walk with to help them with their own opting in or opting out or whatever, like that's for them. Um, all you can do is ask yourself every day, like, how do you want to show up as their mom today?
Yeah.
And how did you feel about that at the end of the day? Like, that is the best you can do. Just
Hmm.
keep coming back to that. And like the rest is theirs.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what happens is it like creates these realignments in like my ability to have boundaries or to say no or
Mm.
to make requests or um enjoy them, find them annoying, whatever is going on
Mm.
that aren't centered around securing my goodness, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So I'm
Yeah.
actually being able to be responsive to life.
Huge, Britain. That is huge. Um, it's reminding me of the story of Vasilisa, actually,
Yeah.
which you
Ooh.
also introduced to me, that I think you learned from Clarissa Pinkola Estes, and
Yes.
this idea of the too good mother, right? And how she had
Mhm.
to release that. Ooh. I'm curious to hear more about if you want to share Saturn in the fifth house in terms of parenting for you, because I do feel like this is, part of unshaming the fifth house that I really have no authority over. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, it's interesting to think about Saturn there in this case.
Mm,
Um, but I think the way I've conceived it is that just I always had a hard time when they were young with just like relaxing into playing like on the floor with them because it felt so non-doing and it felt so like I just felt like can I really just lay here like this? Like aren't I supposed to
mm,
be doing something? I think also having
mhm,
moon in 10th, it was sort of
mm,
like
mm.
I gotta like do something,
Okay.
you know? So
I
I
also have moon
feel
in 10th, so that's super relatable.
it's
Yes.
like, so we're really just gonna like sit here and like play with
Mm,
these toys? Like, I'm really just
yeah.
gonna like throw the ball with you?
Yeah.
Can I get a time on that? Like, when will that end? Because and my younger one, my older one's very self-guided. So you just put stuff in front of her and she was like, I'm good. And she's still this way. Like she could be in her room all day long. She doesn't even look at her phone. She's deep in creative projects. She's also got Saturn in the fifth. She
Yeah.
is deep in creative projects. And so
Mm,
I thought all children were like this because she's like a parallel play child. Like we love being near each other and we're like not actually, but it's like the happiest hum in the room, you know?
oh.
But my younger one, as a little baby, I'd put stuff in front of her and she's kind of looking at me like, well, are we going to do this together or not? It was like, wait, you want me to like play with you? And then, yeah, I remember when she was a little older, tearing up, just saying, you don't like to play with me. Cause to
Mm,
her, that was how we could connect, you
mm,
know,
mm,
would be like,
mm,
if you played with me right now, that would be really fun. And I was just like, I don't know how to do that. Like I truly felt in my body, I don't know how to do that.
mm,
Um, that has been, it has been just the last 7 years as I've been repairing my relationship to my body. Speaking of Venus, like that I've been able to just hang out, like whatever hanging out is. Like I never understood that even young. I'd see
mm,
people just like hanging. It was like, don't we all have work to do? I like never understood hanging out.
mm,
Um,
mm, mm,
and I really feel like Matt has helped me with this too.
mm, mm,
Both of them, my younger one and Matt, are Sagittarius rising with Gemini moons. And then they both have very um like their fifth houses are very happy places.
mm,
And I kind of co-regulate to them to learn how
mm,
to self-regulate. Like that's what this is.
mm,
Okay.
mm, mm.
Um, yeah, just honestly. And I've always been great at attunement when we're like doing something.
Mm, mm. Yeah. Yeah.
Like if we're hiking, we're in the car, we're talking, we're eating together. We're like, but when it's sort of like out in the open, um, playing, that's
Mm,
I felt really like I've struggled there. So
yeah.
hmm,
Playing
thanks
is
for
hard.
asking.
Yeah. Thank you for
Playing is
sharing.
hard.
Playing is hard. I mean, you're reminding me of also, thank our partners. Bless their hearts. Because I'm reminded of how my partner Gary has really helped me embrace more of my bratty side, Britain. Because
Mm.
as a fifth house in Capricorn with domicile Mars and Saturn, I can be bratty, And when I'm bratty, Like I'm not just like play bratty, like I'm bratty and I'm forceful. And that was not well received at all in my childhood from all sides. My parents didn't like it. My teachers didn't like it. My environments didn't like it. So I was like, okay, I guess I gotta be a good boy, whatever that means, right? But recently I was pet sitting with my partner, for this cat. And then we suddenly had this mind blown moment of like, wow, pets never sit still, do they? They do not sit still, even if they love chilling with you, right? Like, if you ever had a cat sit with you or a dog, they're never still. They're always moving. Like, even if it's their tail or their ears, right? They're always moving. So it's really strange to me that we as kids, and I think thinking about our inner child, I would also insert that into the fifth house, right? Um, we have been taught to sit still. This is something that I'm actually kind of
Mm.
currently on a crusade, for those. I have a Sag IC, if you can't tell, ruled by an exalted Jupiter in Cancer. So I go on crusades. And one of my current crusade is like to get us out of this free state actually when we're in front of our computers. Because so many
Mm.
of us join like Zoom classes and things like that. And then we feel like we have to be frozen in front of our computers. We have to be like good citizens. It's like, you guys, you paid for this course. Let's have some fucking fun, Like,
Yeah.
let's play. And it's like, it's so strange to me that we in society have created generations upon generations of like kids who sit still and that's considered good. Like how this is
I
subjugation
know it
101,
is.
right? And it's like I was a very active child and I feel like as an adult now, I want to move,
Mm.
and my inner child wants to move and I want to be a little bratty sometimes. So I love what you're bringing in, Britain, because I think the theme here is how a lot of us seek romantic relationships that can help us heal some part of our inner child wounding.
Mm,
And I
mhm.
think part of unshaming the fifth house is letting that be okay, Like you are not here to be spiritually hygienic, my friends.
Oh
Like we're
my God.
learning these spiritual tools so that we can be better at life and we can be more vigorous and we can take more chances, right? We're not here to just be like, okay, I'm done. I've ascended.
Yeah.
Or
I'm
at least for me.
offended. Oh, please, no.
No, like I don't want that. Like I wanna experience more of life. Like I want to do the things that I was scared of doing.
Mm.
I want to have a robust spiritual practice because I want to be an artist who can release things that nobody buys and still be okay.
Yeah, there
You
you
know?
have it.
Yeah, I want to uh ask someone out on a date and be rejected and cry all night and still be okay, right? Like still be able to embrace that that's part of me. I want to be someone that, someone I really deeply love, like betray me and still be okay.
Mhm.
Embrace all of that, right? Like to me, that's the point of my spirituality. I'm not interested in a spirituality that makes me more clinical.
Mm. Yeah, I landed on this phrasing, becoming a person of evidence. It reminds me of what you're saying. Yeah. And I think the fifth house is creating a form of evidence of
Yeah.
some kind,
Yeah.
but like, what's the meaning we're making about it?
Mm, mm,
And like life, I want my life to feel like I'm here, I'm here. I'll whatever the evidence comes up, I'll roll with it,
yeah. Yeah.
I'll be
Yeah.
there to respond to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll alchemize it into something else.
Hmm. Hmm. That's such a generous perspective on the idea of evidence, Britain, because I think what I've seen for myself, and I think for a lot of people that I've worked with, is we sometimes use failures as evidence that we're not supposed to do the thing, right? Like, oh, I had this art teacher when I was in third grade who ignored me or didn't think that my art was worth it. So therefore, I'm not going to be an artist. I am not an artist because somebody says I wasn't a good artist. I'm not a lover because somebody says I'm not a good lover, right? I'm not, or I'm not a parent or I'm not a good parent because my child didn't like me or didn't behave the way I wanted them to behave, right? And I think what you are just saying about evidence is so profound because we do attach a lot of meanings to the evidence, right? And sometimes I think it's like this really tricky territory of like, can we use some of the unpleasant evidence to, yeah, to actually be an opportunity to see where we are being really hard on ourselves and where we can like
Mhm.
unravel a little bit. I don't know. I'm curious to hear more actually from you about what that means, becoming a person of evidence.
I, to me, it has meant like I noticed how the reason that I didn't want to do something, AKA, let me say it another way, I was shaming a desire to experience, explore, participate in some way, enact a yes or no, shaming a desire to blank because I was afraid of what the evidence might be on the other side.
Mm,
Like the evidence of failing, the evidence that people think I'm a bad person, the evidence that people didn't understand what I was trying to say, the evidence of whatever. And so this idea of becoming a person of evidence meant that it meant that I could listen to the previously shamed desire and trust that it was taking me somewhere, which was
mm,
going to bring evidence. There is going to be evidence, but I don't actually know what it is.
yeah.
And I'm going to trust that if the desire is here, what if that's like sacred information
Mm,
and not like designed to torture me? And even
mm,
though, even then, like maybe the torture is pleasurable, right? Speaking of kink. So um it's like, what are the tools and the skills that would be helpful
mm,
for me to become someone who just goes into follows my desire with and then greets the evidence that shows up.
yeah. It's
And
beautiful.
that's basically like I feel like kind of the point of all my classes is
Mm,
just said in different ways.
yeah. Yeah.
But I feel like what we're talking about here is also shape shifting capacity as well. So I don't know, maybe this is like a kind of a place to kind of move into closure with our conversation and by way of thinking about the idea of shape shifting, because I'd love to hear you talk about what that's meaning for you right now
Mm,
as you're in the middle of promo, because I always feel like we're in such zesty language when we're promoting something. So I'd love to know what shape shifting is meaning for you. And
yeah.
maybe you feel like it would be helpful with unshaming the fifth house. So feel free to riff there.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of wanna I have this really bad habit actually because when people ask me questions, I tend to think about something else and I'm like, "Oh, I need to I need to pop that bubble first." I just want to say maybe as we're kind of bringing shapeshifting into alchemizing it with the fifth house, I'm also thinking about how the fifth house is in a square to the eighth house and opposite the 11th house, right?
Hmm.
And so part of, I think, and I don't think this will come off as a surprise to anyone. Something I've heard a lot when people bring topics around creativity into readings with me or into classes is fear of either being judged or impacting their um, people around them. Because when we let ourselves be seen in our full creative glory, some people will be really rattled by that, you
Oh,
know?
yeah.
Big time,
That's some
Britain.
evidence too.
I know you talk a lot about this because people don't like it. And I will say, just really briefly, that's about them. That has nothing to do with you.
Yeah, it
You are
really,
just fucking expressing, you know, and you can't control where people are at because you don't know other people's creative wounding.
yeah. Yeah, that is just the truest.
Yeah. And, you know, the more mature people will just kind of, you know, you can feel them actually almost energetically, like creating a little bit of boundary with you or creating some space so that maybe they can see their own stuff and they can deal with their own stuff in a way that's mature and contained and feels good to them. And that also doesn't always feel great because some people will just kind of distance themselves and not want to kind of come around you when especially if you are doing your fifth house stuff, you want to be seen. You want people to connect with you, right? You want your art to be the bridge between you and the world.
Mhm.
Because basically when we're making art, we're saying, hey, look at me. Here's a bridge you can cross so you can see deeper parts of me, right? And then some people will just be like, no thanks. And I
Yeah.
know I'm saying it like in a humorous way, but it's painful. You know, it's really painful when that happens. So I just want to bring this in because the eighth house has to do with like places where we're entangled, and the 11th house has to do with making space for shared hopes and dreams with each other, right? And so yeah, when you do something really powerful in your fifth house, that's going to impact your eighth house and your 11th house too, you know, on top of your second house, right? So it's kind of a extravaganza.
I know,
Like
and I do feel like on as as big of a bummer as it can be when you feel that your, brave authenticity may have been unwelcome, shall we say,
Mhm.
or misunderstood.
Yeah.
It also like magnetizes people that are like hot damn into it. And
Yes.
there are those that come in to fill the space,
Yeah.
and support you and like lift it up and say,
Yeah.
"Hey, everyone look over here. This is really cool."
Mhm. Mhm.
Um and that process I think is one that gets like, speaking of swelling and falling away or whatever we were saying about the moon earlier, like if I if you think about like the audience for your creativity, um like it's like a shifting audience,
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
and for me, I it helps me to focus on who's coming towards and not get hooked in who seems to be backing off.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. It's a game of attention, you
Yeah,
know?
whoa.
It's a game
Mhm.
of attention. Yeah. So shapeshifting is such an interesting concept because I feel like this is something I've been dealing with all my life. You know, I have 7 out of 9 of my human design centers undefined or open. I am all mutable angles in my astrology, right? Sun, moon also mutable, and my um ascendant ruler is also mutable. So I feel like mutability is something that is a non-negotiable in my path. And my path itself, you know, I've been saying you are your path and your path is you. So your path will always reflect back to you aspects of who you are. If you see, you know, maybe I don't know if this is true, Britain, but like if you are walking the martial path, maybe you are always having to deal with some level of confrontation, right? Confrontation with the
Gosh.
self, confrontation with the other, you know, and things like
Was
that.
I the one just posting on confrontation?
Yes. So, you know, this is, I think, where astrology can be such a great tool because it can show us, right? Like the nature of our path when we think about our ascendant, like the ascendant I think of as like the essential quality that infuses that path. And so as someone who's a mutable rising, I've had to deal with what does it look like if, I thought I was riding an elevator and suddenly it turned into a subway, right? Like, what are we doing here? What's happening, right? It's kind of like living in Alice in Wonderland. So shapeshifting is, for better or for worse, something I've been learning all my life. Like, what does it mean to shapeshift? And some of the ways in which I've shapeshifted or pivoted right out of certain relationships or out of certain situations or certain career have been much welcome. Like they felt like, oh, thank goodness. Like I remember getting into being an astrologer, after um very intensely working on my singer-songwriter project felt like such a gorgeous welcome, right? Like it was such a change of scenery that I really needed. But there are also times when I've had to shapeshift in ways that didn't feel good to me, because circumstances force me to. So there are so many different ways that I think we can shapeshift and we can be with change. I think what's been at the core of my work has been this question of like how do we deal with change, right? And I think when we bring it into the context of the fifth house, what can be so challenging about creative projects is that to me, creative projects or working with creativity, working with children even, is always a collaboration. You're not alone, right? And that's both amazing and also kind of scary because you do want to express something, right? That's coming from out of you. And so I see shapeshifting as something that we can deeply cultivate skills around, something that we can learn. How do we dance with change instead of resisting change, right? How do we um, play with the wisdom of the mutable signs? What happens if we spend some time thinking about the mutable signs, which are Pisces, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Gemini, right? As well as their rulers, traditionally Mercury and Jupiter, in terms of helping us deal with change in a way that feels like us also taking responsibility for our spiritual path. I think what's interesting about the mutable signs, right, is because they're ruled by Mercury and Jupiter. Yes, there's the trickster quality of Mercury, but there's also the stabilizing, cohering quality of Jupiter, right? And so
Mm.
to me, there is a way to shapeshift that isn't willy-nilly. Because like I said earlier, I could just be like, well, nobody signed up after 24 hours, taking it down, right? That's one way to shapeshift, but I don't think people who will be attracted to learning or curious about learning what, the practices and the ideas of shapeshifting can open up for them is interested in necessarily doing that. I think we want to do it in a way that feels good, that feels actually um, enhancing our ability to be authentic.
Hmm.
Because I think shapeshifting gets this really bad reputation, right? Because it's kind of like avoiding or tricking someone into believing that you are something that you're not. But as someone who's walked the mutable path, I've learned that actually the only way I get to any sort of authenticity is through shapeshifting. I have to
Hmm.
try out a bunch of different things, right? Because otherwise, how would I know? How would I know? If I don't try, if I don't, you know, practice my flexibility, how do I know if I don't like it?
Right.
Yeah.
I know. We've talked, I think, in the past about like with Pisces, there can be a lot of shame around like the word merging, like
Mm.
you're
Mhm.
merging or
You're
whatever.
merging.
But it's like, well, wait a minute though. Like a merging can be really fun.
Mhm.
And it's kind of my gift. So don't say that.
Yeah.
I think the question is like, um, when does it feel um it's like the relationship to yourself is an interesting one when you are so absorbent or can be so mutated by the environment, but
Yeah.
that doesn't mean you're any less authentic. It's just part of how you move through the world.
Exactly. Exactly. Yep. And I think to tie it back into the fifth house again, if someone is, identifying with the idea of being an artist, right? Be that of their own life or of their creations, chances are you are speaking to the spirit of the creation, right? But there will
Mhm.
be a time when that spirit of that creation decided, okay, we're done. Our contract here is done. And then maybe if you are walking the path of an artist, you need to start talking to a different spirit, right? Like, in using you as an example, Britton, or me, right, when we create different offerings or facilitate different containers, we're talking to distinctly different beings, right? They have their own intelligence moving through them. And so I think shapeshifting is also really helpful because then we can become more of a vessel. This is maybe thinking about shapeshifting through the lens of Virgo, right? When we are a vessel, we have to maintain a certain level of form. We have to maintain a certain level of groundedness. We have to know who we are. It takes an incredible level of skill around nervous system regulation to be able to be that vessel,
Mm.
right? For a finite period of time, because you're not going to be a vessel for that creation forever. Currently, we're recording this in 2024, right? Just right after the summer. I'm thinking about someone like Charlie XCX, who has been her new album, Brat, is like, I'm such a fan of it. And I know she's been doing that for a while. Like this energy is something she's been working through for a while. And I'm really curious, someone like this, right? An artist who has been working on something maybe kind of under the shadows for a while and then gets a lot of recognition. What happens after they get that recognition? Do they continue on that trajectory, or do they follow maybe that mutating inspiration that wants to take them somewhere else, right? And I'd like to believe that we don't always have a choice around that. Like sometimes, the spirit of our business or the spirit of our creation or our children just take us to the new place, right? And
Yes.
how do we deal with being taken, right, to that new
Mm.
place? There's something I think very Persephone about shape
Mm.
shifting as well. Yeah.
Mm.
Mhm.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Anything else you want to name or share or before we close here?
Mm. Just a lot of gratitude for you, Britton. Thank you for creating the space. Thank you for creating this series. I feel like the whole Unshaming the Science series, I mean, you know this better than anyone, but I think it's been phenomenal. It has been something that, has benefited a lot of people, like myself included, as one of your students, right? Um, and I think what's so unique about the series is that it's given people space to really talk about pain points in astrology, thinking
Mm.
about you as walking this martial path. Right? Like it is providing, I think, a space where we can openly talk about the ways in which being alive has wounded us in some shape or form,
Ooh.
through the lens of these signs, the lens of these planets, and the lens of these houses. And for me personally, it's not only felt cathartic, it's also just felt like it's an invitation that brings me closer to life, you know? And
Mm.
sometimes that really fucking scared me, but but thank you, because I think, it really speaks to your ability as a practitioner and as a vessel, to steward this offering. So thank you. Thank you.
Mm. Thank you, Jonathan. I'm really
Mhm.
receiving that.
Mhm.
Mm. Do you want to share anything about how folks can connect with you, what you got going on?
Yeah. So
This
Shapeshifting
episode,
Academy.
oh, sorry. I was just going to say this episode probably has a long life too, because I think many folks will find the series in years to come. So
Yeah.
you can also speak broadly.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Um, hmm. I would say maybe the most consistent place to find me is through my podcast, Healing the Spirit. Um, at least as of 2024, that's the name. And yeah, I try to share episodes weekly. I have conversations with a lot of really cool people like you, Britton. We've had quite a few episodes on healing the spirit. So find me there. Um, my newsletter is a great place to catch me as well. I do readings. I work with people one-on-one, longer term as well, or like multi-sessions. Um, and yeah, I facilitate courses. I teach energy work. I teach a blend of astrology and energy work. Actually speaking of Mars, I have a container on Mars called Eyes on the Edge, which probably going to run again, maybe in early 2025, I'm thinking at this point.
Mm.
Um, if you're listening to this when this is out, um, my current offering is called Shapeshifting Academy. It's about, as I mentioned, looking at the mutable signs, playing with the mutable signs, um, getting a little wild. Um, and it starts Thursday, October 3rd, 2024. And yeah, I have, sliding scale pricing. And yeah, folks can just check it out. I was really, really proud of the page as well. Like I spent so much time on it.
I
My
love
Saturn
the
in the fifth
aesthetic
house.
so much.
Yeah, I spent so much time on it and I was really, really proud of it. So yeah, I would love for folks to check all of that out. And I think that's about it. Yeah. And also I make music and I think 2024 and 2025 is going to be the year where I'm going to be releasing music a lot more regularly. So stay tuned. Yeah.
Thank you, Jonathan. All links will be provided, and just appreciate you so much coming back. Till next
Yeah.
time.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Britton. What a gift. Thanks.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, Jonathan Coe, for another moon to moon extravaganza, which is you and me talking. It's such a treasure. Thank you. Listeners, I've got all the links that you will need for connecting to Jonathan, for signing up for Shapeshifting Academy, for listening to Healing the Spirit, all in the show notes. And I hope you will connect with Jonathan, however that resonates for you. I'm wondering what this episode brought up for you. If you loved this episode, I hope that you will let me know about it. And I hope that you will consider writing a rating or a review, or like leave a rating and write a review rather, to share the love and help other humans find Moon to Moon, help them know that it's like a good use of time. People's time and attention is their most precious thing. And so reviews and ratings are a real thing that helps to create testimony and trust that is worth experimenting with. So thank you to everyone who's already left a review or a rating sometime in the past. And thank you to all of you who are going to go do that right now or will be doing it in the future. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to share with you the next episode, Unshaming the Sixth House, coming up probably in the next week or two. All right. Cheers. Thank you.